when it comes to human beings, there are essentially three fundamental principles. And the first principle is what I call the God principle. And we sometimes call it the principle of mind. And that's the fundamental awareness that we are alive. Now that may seem really basic. It's an ordinary miracle that we're alive. But it's an incredible miracle that this combination of cells inside your body somehow are animated and cohesive in a way that allows us to interact and think of ourselves as these separate beings having these separate lives that bump into each other from time to time. So the God principle, the principle of mind, essentially says that we have life and that there is an energy of life that we are a part of. And everyone agrees on this, right? The scientists, the physicists talk about the energy of life. They talk about the quantum field, right? The mystics talk about the great oneness, the ocean of life. You'll find in any religion, they'll talk about the Alpha and the Omega. They'll talk about God. They'll talk about the Godhead. They'll talk about the totality. They'll talk about the formless and the form. Well, that whole thing, that whole game is the first principle, that we are alive. Now, there's another principle that we're not just alive, we're aware. We have the capacity to experience life. Again, it would be very easy to take that for granted. There's an old Marshall McLuhan saying that, I don't know who discovered water, but I guarantee you that it wasn't a fish. Right? Because a fish swims in water all the time. It's not even aware of water. Well, because we are living in a field of consciousness, we're not even aware that that's going on. But you can become aware of the fact that you have the capacity for awareness, that we are living in this field of pure potential to be aware of anything. It's almost like the developing fluid for a photograph, that whatever goes into it is brought out. And consciousness is infinite, and at a personal level, we experience different levels of consciousness. So we can be conscious of just what's happening in front of us and just what's happening outside us. We can begin to understand more about how things unfold, and we can be conscious not only of what's happening outside us, but begin to become conscious of our own thoughts and feelings. We can begin to become conscious not just of what's going on outside us, our own thoughts and feelings, but of the nature of thought and feeling, which is what we're talking about in this program, of the nature of consciousness, of our capacity to be aware, of the nature of life, that there's this very ordinary miracle that we take for granted, most of us take for granted, which is that we're alive, that we're a part of this larger energy and intelligence of life. And then a third principle, what I call the creative principle, is the principle of thought. And the principle of thought is that we can think anything, which means, because we experience our thinking, we can experience anything. So one way to think about mind is infinite creative potential. And consciousness is what brings that potential to life. And thought is what distinguishes the different aspects of potential. It's been described as the missing link between the formless potential of mind and our actual experience of life. Now, at this point, it would not surprise me at all if you're going, yes, very interesting, very interesting. What's your point? And so let me see if I can simplify it a little bit. If you were to go to a movie studio where they were filming, you would see that even while something very dramatic is happening that's going to be on screen, so maybe a couple is making love, well, if you pulled back, you would notice that while that couple was making love, there were a bunch of people standing around with cameras and sound and lights and all sorts of other equipment. And if you went even further out, you'd see there was a whole crew setting up food and doing other things. And if you went around, you'd find props, and you'd see that there's this whole thing going on behind the scenes. And what we see on the screen is just a tiny, tiny bit. It's just like an end result of what's actually going on the movie set. In the 19th century, the Lumiere brothers presented one of the first examples of cinema. And it was a very simple shot of a train pulling into the station. So the camera was just there, and the train sort of came straight towards the camera. And And people sat in the cinema and they'd never seen a movie before. It's hard to imagine what it would be like to see a movie if you've never seen one before. But what happened is, as the train came into the station on the screen, half of the audience ran out of the cinema screaming in terror. Because they didn't have any way of processing the difference between what was happening up on the screen and what was real. Well, the same thing is true in our experience of life. Because we aren't aware of the ordinary miracle of thought and how consciousness brings thought to life, we get fooled every time. And these projections of our mind, like those early movies to people who've never seen movies before, we experience them as though they're real, and we get terrified of the scary ones and excited about the exciting ones, and we fall in love with the beautiful ones. But the moment that we begin to understand how a movie works, our experience is forever changed.